It was a beautiful spring day in central Virginia. 10-year-old JP and his younger sister Adele raced from their home through the pasture or field that led to their grandfather's farmhouse. Though originally from New Orleans, Louisiana, their grandfather Lafitte now lived on a neighboring horse farm. Grandfather Lafitte loved to tell the children stories. Today, he had promised to tell them all about the War of 1812. JP was learning about this war in school, and of course Adele wanted to know everything about anything that her brother was doing. Before he retired, their grandfather had been a history professor. A professor is someone who teaches college students. He declared that he was an expert on the subject. Grandfather Lafitte was waiting for the children on the front porch. As JP and Adele settled into chairs at the table across from their grandfather, Adele noticed that he was holding an old leather-bound journal. "What do you have there?" asked Adele inquisitively. She had just turned 8, and JP said she was always full of questions. "Oh, this journal belonged to your great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. He fought in the War of 1812. I will tell you more about him later," Grandfather Lafitte explained. "Now, where should I begin?" he asked eagerly. "I have a list of topics that I need to learn about," started JP. Topics are the main subjects of a discussion, a paper, or a project. "He has to know about President James Madison and his wife Dolly," Adele interrupted excitedly. "Yes," said JP, finishing what he was saying. "I have to know about the beginning of the war, the USS Constitution, the attacks on Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, Andrew Jackson and the Battle of New Orleans, and how the war ended." "Well, that's quite a list," exclaimed Grandfather Lafitte. "We'd better get started then. It sounds like you do not need to know anything about pirates," he added with a curious tone. "Pirates?" gasped JP. "Were there pirates in the War of 1812? "We shall see," chuckled Grandfather Lafitte. "I think I will start at the beginning and tell you about the man who was president when the war began." "James Madison," said Adele proudly. She had recently attended a school field trip to Montpelier because it was close to their home. She learned a lot about James Madison. Grandfather began. James Madison was born on March 16, 1751. He grew up on a large plantation in central Virginia, not far from where we are now. A plantation is a large farm. His family home was called Montpelier. As a young boy, Jemmy, as his father called him, was homeschooled, or taught at home. It's been said that he read every book that his father had in his library, and Mr. Madison had a lot of books. When he was 17, James went to the College of New Jersey, which is now called Princeton University. Just as he did when he was young, James Madison loved to read. He enjoyed learning Latin and Greek and debating in college. Debating means discussing something with someone whose opinion might be different from your own, similar to what you will do when you present persuasive speeches. James actually graduated from college in only 2 years. Today, it usually takes twice that long, or 4 years, to finish college. "I like learning Spanish in school," Adele added enthusiastically. "I'm glad that you do," replied Grandfather Lafitte, smiling at his granddaughter. He continued, "As a young man, James Madison did not like the way the colonies were run by Britain. He thought the colonists should be able to govern themselves, or be responsible for making their own decisions. In 1774, when he was just 23 years old, James Madison became a leader in the House of Burgesses. The House of Burgesses was the first form of government in colonial America. The next year, the colonies were at war with Great Britain. This war, the Revolutionary War, lasted until 1783. Americans won their freedom, and they became citizens of a new nation, the United States of America. Citizens are people who live and belong in a particular place and are given special rights by the rulers or government of that place. "Didn't James Madison write the Constitution?" asked JP. "You are right," replied Grandfather. "After the war, he continued to be involved in governing Virginia. He is perhaps most famous for his role in helping to write the Constitution, though. James Madison was the one who had the idea to use each state's population as a way of deciding how many elected representatives it should have in Congress. Today, there are 2 elected senators for each state. The number of representatives for each state depends upon how many people live in that state. He was also responsible for organizing the government into 3 branches with different powers. In fact, much of the Constitution was written by James Madison, but he did get some help from George Washington and many other founding fathers. James Madison also helped to write another part of the Constitution called the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights protects American people and their property. "When are you going to tell us about Dolly Madison?" asked Adele. "Mama says she was a really interesting lady." "Yes, she was," replied Grandfather Lafitte. "That's coming next, don't you worry." People who knew him said that James Madison was a shy and serious man. He also had some health problems. His poor health and his involvement in politics, he was a busy man, meant that he did not spend much time socializing. Socializing means talking to and doing things with other people in a friendly way. However, in 1793, when he was 42, James Madison met a young woman named Dolly Todd. Dolly Todd was 25 when she met James Madison. She previously had been married to a man named John Todd. She and her husband, John, had 2 sons, John Payne and William. Sadly, Dolly's first husband and her youngest son, William, both died from yellow fever. Dolly, who was known to be very cheerful and outgoing, turned to her friends and family for support. Her friends introduced her to James Madison. When they met, James Madison was a member of the House of Representatives. They liked each other and began to spend more and more time together. They got married in September 1794. "Where did they live after they got married?" asked Adele. Well, at first, they lived in James Madison's family home, Montpelier, not too far from here. However, in 1801, when his close friend Thomas Jefferson became president, the Madisons moved to the new capital. "Washington, D.C., exclaimed Adele. "Exactly," replied Grandfather Lafitte. "James Madison became Thomas Jefferson's Secretary of State. That meant that he was responsible for dealing with other countries on behalf of the United States. Almost immediately, he had problems with Great Britain and France." "What kind of problems, Grandfather?" asked Adele. "Both countries were interfering with U.S. merchant ships," said Grandfather. "Why were they doing that?" asked J.P., who by now had finished his entire ham sandwich. "You see, a series of wars had broken out in Europe. These wars were named after the man who started them, the well-known French military leader Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon wanted France to become the most powerful nation in the world, but Great Britain and other European nations wanted to stop him. Britain had one problem, though. Although it had a powerful navy, it did not have enough sailors. To get more sailors, they captured men and forced them to join the navy. In the beginning, they only captured men in their own country, but as the Napoleonic Wars continued, they began to stop American ships and capture members of their crew, too. "That must not have made James Madison very happy," said Adele. "It didn't, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't convince the British to stop. After being president for 2 terms, Thomas Jefferson suggested that his friend James Madison run for president. In March 1809, James Madison became the 4th president of the United States. "And Dolly Madison became the First Lady?" quizzed Adele. "She did indeed," replied Grandfather Lafitte. "Dolly Madison was actually the First Lady. The term First Lady refers to the wife of the U.S. President. While Dolly Madison wasn't the first wife of the U.S. President, she set the standard for the role as official hostess of the country. She was an excellent hostess. She had magnificent parties. She was known for her love of fashion and had quite a few fine dresses. She even helped to design the interior or inside of the new president's house, which we now know as the White House. The president's house became known as the White House when President Theodore Roosevelt referred to it as that more than 100 years later. By the time James Madison came into office, war was looming. Looming means threatening to happen, or that something bad is about to happen. Everyone knew the war was coming, but nobody wanted it to come. Many members of Congress were urging him to declare war on Great Britain. They thought the British had been arming Native Americans and were encouraging them to fight American settlers moving west. James Madison felt that he had no other option but to lead his nation into war. On June 18, 1812, the United States declared war on Great Britain.